right, so it is Saturday, and we are here with RockHill Publishing at this fantastic Miami Book Festival live event that we've been doing all week, which I must say has been so much fun. So, James, I'm so glad that we got to do this with you this year. But everyone, we are talking everything fantasy. Fantasy authors are here with RockHill Publishing. So, James, take it away.
Live event. Thank you, Amy. Amy from PR Perceptions.
Yes.
Yeah, our publishing company, our publicist company. Yeah. Sometimes things get tongue-tied here, but it's a great day, beautiful day in Miami. Isn't that right, Haley?
It's actually not hot as all hell, so yes.
Well, I'm in Virginia. Haley is in Miami, in Florida, and David is in Ohio, if I remember correctly.
Yep, Cleveland area. Yep.
So we are all fantasy writers, and all hail from different places. Amy is in Texas, just so we round out the group here. So we're all over the place. We all write, but we all write fantasy, and we all write different types of fantasy. David is high magic, and Haley is elemental magic. And we are going to talk about the differences between the fantasy and me. I write just general fantasy, I guess, historical fantasy. Let's put it that way, because I try to throw a little history into it, and try to get that going. So one thing I do wanted to ask, and one thing I wanted to talk to you about is, since we all write fantasy, we all create these worlds, because that's what fantasy does. We create our own world, we put our own people in it, and we don't have to obey the rules and regulations of the world around us. Do you find it easier to create a world from scratch, or do you find it better to create a world based on the world that we actually live in? Like I said, I do historical fantasy, so I create my worlds from the world we live in, and then I twist and turn everything around to meet my will. How about you, Haley?
So the best answer to that is yes. So my book is weird in the fact that I have my own, complete fantasy world, but there are portals to the regular world, so the two kind of exist at the same time, and that was really interesting writing. But when I do create fantasy worlds, especially for Nanagan, I did actually pull a lot of place names from North Carolina, which is where I'm originally from. So if you know what you're looking for, you can actually find the cities and stuff in Arceal, which is the world in Nanagan. But not many people do. Very few people have actually called me out on it.
Well, it's hard to find, because, like I said, I'm in Virginia, and I only been to North Carolina a few times, and I didn't recognize any of the names.
Good, I did my job right. They're hidden stealthily.
I know the Charlotte area a little bit, but that's about it.
How about you, David? How do you like to build your world?
Oh, it's easy, because this world is fake, and I live in my fantasy world.
Well said.
Actually, I had a very easy time building it, and in a way, I've been building it for decades. Because I played D&D, Pathfinder, and other role-playing games for most of my life. So I've been constructing fantasy worlds for ages. The closest I get to a real-world counterpart is when I was designing the terrain. I fashioned it off of Ohio 200 years ago, when the area was heavily forested, but I just dropped it to more of a North Carolina climate, so that I would deal with a little less snow and different weather patterns.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I build my world, like I said, since I do historical fantasy, I have to do a lot of research sometimes. Now, being in Virginia for the last 20 years or so, I based a good part of the Emerald Lady on the area around here. And because it's about pirates, and I love pirates, in my past life I was a pirate, and I shall return to the pirate world. I use a lot of the area and the history that was around Virginia and around the Carolinas and the Caribbean, because I also like the Caribbean. So I also threw a lot of that area into it in the discussion and the description of the places that they went. So, you know, you pick a couple of spots and this is where they stop and this is where they have battles and things like that. So it gives you a bit of an anchor to this world, and then you can see the fantasy world, you know, intermingle into it. So the characters are more out of fantasy, but the places are more out of the real world. That's just me.
Nice. That's interesting because that kind of ties into this question that I love to ask, especially fantasy authors, is how did you kind of come up with the whole concept? And if you decided to build your own world and have maps and stuff like that, because I know a lot of readers that read fantasy books and they like to have like the maps and stuff like that. So how do you come up with these concepts? Do they just come to you in a dream like some other authors? How do you kind of decide and just like, no, this is the name of it. This is what it looks like. How does it just kind of pop in your head? So who wants to go first?
Haley can go first because she got a really nice map in her book.
Honestly, when I was writing, I didn't really see the landscape. I just kind of, they're going, oh, okay, they come to a river. Okay, I guess there's a river. Oh, the city's next to the mountains. Okay, I guess there's mountains. You know, it was all kind of just
it came as
it appeared as I wrote, and it just kind of wrote itself. I guess the landscape lends itself to what the book needed for me. I'm a weird writer, guys. Like,
yeah, that's actually
just happens, and that's pretty much my life.
I like that though. I haven't heard, like, usually, you know, the most common one I've kind of heard is like, oh, you know, it appeared to me in a dream that this was their name and this was the place and how it was built, you know, it came to them in a dream. So the fact that it like evolved for you while you were writing, I think kind of fits with how millennials are kind of writing nowadays. Like if I were to write, I kind of feel like I would just start writing and it would just go as it's gonna go, you know, like make it, let it be like its own thing. So that, I love that. I think that's fascinating. So David, how did you come up with yours?
Well, kind of in the same fashion Haley did. I write things, and it wasn't until after I already put everything together and sent the book off that I realized I didn't have a map either. So I've slowly been sketching out a map and going through my book, figuring, okay, it was 4 days travel time to here, 3 days travel time to here, and started putting things on a map and figuring out about how far things would be. And you know, then you have to account for, it's like, are you on horseback? Are you not on horseback? How heavily forested is the area? How good are the roads? How many villages did you stop in along the way? So you can play with that quite a bit as far as when you're designing the map. It doesn't have to be super accurate.
Yeah.
And I'm remembering one of Haley's interviews earlier with coming up with place names and names of characters, where it's just, you know, random stuff just kind of falls out of your brain and it goes up on the page. And I write in the same way as she does, that okay, this character is named da-da, and it's on there. And if I don't like the spelling, or if I have changed a few names because they looked good on paper, but when I tried to pronounce them, it was a little more difficult. Going, okay, I need to change this because it looks good, but I can't read it or I can't speak it.
Isn't that just the random curse of fantasy writers? Can anyone say it?
Exactly.
Yes, that is a random curse, and that is a problem I have too with character name, because I come up with the character name, I'll just look around and pick a couple of words, slap them together, and then realize it's unpronounceable.
Yeah.
And one thing I was going to do, which I told Athena, our editor, I was going to start using the names of medicines, not the little short name they give you, but those long, unpronounceable names, and make my characters those names.
Sorry, you should just use like scientific names of animals and plants. No one can say those either.
Yeah.
I've actually used some of those as a basis for names, where I've taken the scientific name and made some alterations to it in order to get the you know, the character of, you know, of that genus or species.
Well, you know, I guarantee there's a few very happy nerds who figured it out. And they're like, oh my God, I recognize it.
I hope so.
Yeah. David, didn't you create your own language in your book?
I did. I created a language just for magic. when I originally wrote it, I was just putting out names of spells, and it didn't seem all that magical. It didn't seem all that fantastic to me. And I was at Gen Con 5, 6 odd years ago, and one of the author panels I sat on had mentioned, creating a language just for, for the fun of it, not necessarily going, like to where I'm building a dictionary or anything.
Right.
But I started doing that and created some basic rules for the language, some basic syntax, and again, like the names, it's just random words, random sounds that kind of pop out together, and it's like, okay, that means this, this means this, and if you're creating a spell that has this kind of effect, then I combine the words together into a longer word, kind of like German.
Oh my goodness. See, I admire fantasy writers a whole bunch because it's like you create your own little not island, but world, and then some like David create, their own language, which I mean, my toddler creates her own language, so I can understand, I can sympathize with it. But it's like the creativity that kind of comes with being a fantasy writer, I just admire so much. So it's just I am very honored to get to do this interview with you guys because that's my favorite genre besides like mystery and thriller. So
I think Amy is secretly a fantasy writer. She doesn't want to tell us, but she got all these fantasies going. And
I wish. But James, how did you come up with your whole fantasy theme behind it? How did that appear to you?
Well, one thing I did do when talking about names was because all the mermaids are women and they procreate asexually. I decided that each family would be named the same, beginning with the same letter. Like we had Shira, we have Sadie, let's say, or we have Rahima, Roxanne, so whoever was in that family line, instead of being like your last name being all the same, they only have first names. They only have one name. So everybody from that family line will therefore have a name starting with the same letter.
Oh, okay.
I did
And
something
people hated
similar, but it's the last syllable of the name tends to carry over through generations. So
Yeah.
in a way, it's kind of like son of or something.
Yeah. So that was one of the devices that I used in creating the Emerald Lady. And I noticed that you two guys are pantsers. Y'all just sit down at the keyboard and you start typing away. See, I'm a plotter, and I have to figure out everything before I start the book. And now we are in nano-write mode, and I always like to challenge myself. So I decided that for the third book in the Gemstone series, the end of the series, I will not plot anything. I shall pants it all.
Oh, I like it. I like it.
Yes. And of course, I'm way behind.
I was about to say, how's that coming for you? How's that working?
Oh, it's terrible. It is terrible. I have no idea where I'm going, and I just get these spurts of inspiration. Oh yeah, let's do this, and bam, 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 bam. And then I sit there. Okay, now what?
And then you just edit it later. You put you brain vomit all over the keyboard. And then later on, you look at it and go, okay, I like this. That doesn't work. We'll put this back together.
I have to look up facts. See, that's the problem. I have to look up facts. Now, if I was plotting this thing out, I would have found out my facts a long time ago and had them set in my mind about what's going on when. But now it's just like blah, blah, blah. And now we're in the Civil War. Oh, crap. I got to look up stuff about the Civil War.
James, this is why you have to be a planster. You got to plan and fly by the seat of your pants is what I do. So I have like an Excel doc that has like all of my perspectives and roughly what I want to happen. Granted, whether or not that actually happens is a different story, but I kind of have an idea of where I'm going. Sometimes.
I have no idea where I'm going.
Well, doing historical fantasy, you do kind of need to have that little bit of real world research in there, and that does take the time. Whereas, when you're just doing a fantasy world, you can just throw stuff out there, slap it against the wall.
The good part is when I get to the fantasy part, I can just fly through some stuff. And then I hit something where I'm talking about actual real world stuff. And it's like, we grind to a halt as I start looking up, dates and places and people and,
Yeah,
And
that's when I just leave a gap on the page and I skip over that and then come back to it later when I've got time to, to look things up.
yeah,
I
uh,
see that.
I try to get a little bit of it in so that when I come back to look it up, I know what I was talking about or
Yeah.
planning to talk about at least.
So what made you want to do historical fantasy? Is it just because you wanted to combine your love of history and fantasy together, or they just both kind of fascinate you? Because that's an interesting like genre. I haven't really heard of like historical fantasy before.
Yeah, I always liked history. I'm also a big history buff. I'll sit up to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning watching the History Channel.
Oh,
Seeing,
that too.
yes. And
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter what the history is about. I watch the history of trains or the history of iron. So I'm a big I like history. And so when I decided to write a fantasy, I wanted to write, and again, I started The Emerald Lady in Nano. And I had always wrote science fiction, and I wrote crime novel, and I wrote things like that. And I decided for Nano, I was going to do fantasy, something I'd never done before.
Wow.
And so I said, well, if I'm going to write fantasy, I'll make it a historical fantasy, and combine a couple of different loves. So the idea of pirates and mermaids and then history, and then it's like, well, let's just drop them into the particular time in history. So the Emerald Lady take place during the American Revolution.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to get your book because I'm feeling the way that you talk about it. It's like a Pirates of the Caribbean, vibe for me. And I'm like, okay, I can dig this. I can do that. That's like my favorite kind of.
Yeah, it does have a bit of the Pirates of the Caribbean type of feel to it, as well as a little bit of a American Revolution type of thing to it.
Mhm.
So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We turned it out, mixed the potions.
Yeah. So Haley, you had mentioned in your fantasy book that you have like portals that take you. Did they explain that? Because that's like an interesting for me. That's kind of like time portals and stuff, So it goes into more like futuristic. I don't even know what genre that would be. I'm really bad with genres. I'm just like, I like this book title. I like the back. I'm gonna read it. So, but that's kind of it. So does that tie into your book in your fantasy world, or how do the portals work in your book?
So the portals are a massive, crapshoot. It is right time, right place. They are completely magical. You have no say over it. They just happen.
Oh, okay. Nice.
So so it's really interesting, and it works both ways from both the worlds. So someone from our Seal can end up in our world and just be like, okay, there are giant metal boxes that are going along the roads. This is creepy. And then you get someone from our world who's like taken to the other world, and it's just like, what kind of nonsense is this? There's castles. There's like, where's my cell phone? And it's just like you get this weird, like, just what is happening from both sides. So it's just kind of fun. And it was really fun kind of flipping people from the worlds. And then just, I did an entire thing, and unfortunately I had to cut it out from the second book, where a character comes to our world, and it's just like you had to explain cell phones to him and how to drive a car and just radios and all of this really weird stuff where you're just like, this is just normal. But then, just having to figure out how to describe it from someone's point of view who's just like, I have no idea what this is. It was really entertaining. So
that sounds it. I love it. So you spoke of your second book. So how many of you guys are kind of continuing and doing a whole nother like fantasy series? Do you find it easier to write fantasy books in like series and chronicles and things like that, or do you find it harder to do that?
Fantasy naturally lends itself to series because there's so much world building you have to do. So it takes longer, so you kind of have to break the books up, and because your storyline suffers because you have to world build. So it's just like they're massive exploits, and so they're generally just series that go forever.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, when you put so much into world building, you want to do more with the world that you've already put so much effort into it. So there's many stories to tell. I'd planned for mine to be a trilogy. I've already started working on like a short group of short story supplements that will probably be released after the trilogy, because my whole thing is written in first person. So the other characters don't get to have their say as much. So I'm writing a bunch of other characters, or a bunch of other short stories from other characters' perspectives, to have them just add in and mix into the story as I go.
Yeah, so kind of to expand your world, your character world, I guess, and give backstories on maybe not so important characters or people that come across. I love that. That's a good idea.
And I'm
Yeah.
planning another trilogy that takes place about 150 years in the past of same world, but this will allow me to develop more history and focus on different sections of things. So I've got
That's
a
interesting.
lot of this going on in my brain that I need to just be able to sit down and write it all.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did the series because I wanted to jump time jump around history. So it because I do a historical fantasy, I don't have to do a whole lot of world building, but I did want to. Well, the thing is that the mermaids live 1,000 years. So if you want to cover that history, and then of course, if they live 1,000 years, what happened to her mother? What time period did her mother live in? And and we have dragons, and dragons are somewhat eternal.
Oh,
So then I was able to jump time a lot, and that meant I could write more than one book and build the series that way by taking you back and forth through time. Also, the thing that I love, is the idea of time travel.
yeah. See, that's where I'm at. I love those things.
Yeah.
I could enjoy it. I can see how you could write so many books in your series. I mean, you could have a series the same length as, the Enigma series, which is on its 12th book, because you have so many different times historically that you can kind of jump to and from and what you think will happen, kind of in the future and then go back. So, I mean, I could see your books going on forever. I think that I would love something like that. But I can see how, like with David and Haley, because you've spent all this time building this world that you're like, damn it, I am going to get the full extent of this world that I spent all this time doing, and you're going to read it and love it. If it takes you 5 books to get to it, you're going to appreciate this world that I've spent so much time building. So that's why I admire fantasy writers, because you guys put so much creativity and like heart and passion into it, and you spend so much time creating like this language and this world and all these things that you deserve to have like a series of books because you spent so much time and effort into it. So I mean, I could get it, but this is like a side note, because me and Sandy side note, and the one question I do have is, what is the difference between a series and like chronicles? Because how there's like the Narnia Chronicles. What's the difference? Can someone explain that to me? I really don't know what it is, but I feel like it pertains to fantasy, like the type of genre. Haley's laughing at me. Haley, it's not funny. I really don't.
There really isn't a difference. They're synonyms for each other. Series or chronicles is just another way of saying this is someone's story. There's more than one. Go forth and read.
Yeah, I felt like maybe like chronicles tied into a certain genre and series tied into something else,
Well,
I
chronicles
think
are usually
is more of stories of the world, whereas a series is usually a set of characters or a few, some main characters and telling their stories through the series.
Okay.
Where like
Yeah,
Narnia
precisely.
Chronicles has different groups, but all going into Narnia. It's like Wizard of Oz. Baum wrote 15 Oz books. But Dorothy was not always in them. It's it's not about her. It's about Oz.
Yeah, I was going to say chronicles are really about time. So
Right. Okay. That's
obviously chronicle. So it's about usually the same place, or stretched out over a time period. Whereas a series is usually the same characters that go through a different set of stories. So you'll start off at one period of this person's life, and you'll follow him through, or you follow the characters through their life. And so series are usually a little bit shorter because they tend to focus more on the character, where chronicles can stretch for quite some time because they're actually telling you the history of a place or of a people.
Yeah, see, okay, now I understand. I love this. I learn something new every day, I'm telling you. I absolutely love this. But so, Haley, but I guess more, how many books do you think you're going to come up with that are in the same series as Noggin?
For a while, I thought it was gonna be 4, and then my beta readers for the first draft of book 2 were like, "This sucks. We need a different ending," and so that turned it into 3 books. And then because I had to cut a bunch of stuff out, I've now got an entire like side book for a different character that's his own thing, and then I've got prequel stories I can do. I've got epilogue stories I can do. It's all a matter of how much do I want to do it. We'll see. There's going to be at least 3 main books, but outside of that, I make no promises.
Okay, I like it. You're not sure what the future entails, but you know it entails 3 books. I like that. Okay, David, what about you?
This series is going to be a trilogy. Like I said, I have in mind another trilogy, well, probably a trilogy from the past. I also have some historical fantasy that I wanted to write. I was mulling over an idea of doing some short stories of American folklore, but bringing them into more. The first idea that came to me is Paul Bunyan versus the timber industry. and seeing how American folklore would deal with modern society. And I think that will be a lot of fun. That takes a lot of some more research and getting deeper into American folklore, which I've done some study and some reading of in the past. I did a lot of that when I was working on my history degree, but I haven't been focusing on that because I've been trying to focus on these books. I need more writing time. Not
enough hours in the day. I totally understand. There's not. James, what about you? I know that you have the historical fantasy series that you have, but then you also have like murder thrillers. I mean, you have so many different genres. So how far do you think you'll go in this historical fantasy?
Well, it was supposed to be 3 books. And as I got into the 3rd book now, the Diamond Warrior, it's looking like that might wind up as 2 books rather than just, the end of this series, because as I get dragged down the rabbit hole here of different things that I keep throwing in and coming up with, that's the problem with when you're a pantser. Things always start to creep in, and then you go off on these tangents, and it's like absolutely necessary in the story, but it's going to expand the story now because you're now doing this other type of a thing where my main character had developed new powers. So that's going to lead to a whole new set of ordeals. And therefore, it might expand into 4. I'm trying to keep it to 3 books, but it could be 4. And then there could be another book or 2 as I jump to other time periods that, really I like. I haven't touched the Chinese yet.
No.
And this is about dragons, and the Chinese culture is full of dragons. They have, you have the Western culture dragons. And when I was making my logo for RockHill Publishing, which is the dragon on a rock, my nephew did the design for it, and he asked me, "Do you want a Western dragon or do you want an Eastern dragon?" And I was like, "Whatever you want to do is fine with me." But they're completely different cultural aspects of dragons. So Eastern dragons are usually good, and they kind of like are benevolent. They bring fortune and things like that. Whereas Western dragons are usually seen as evil, and people try to, kill them. Yes, see, he got an Eastern dragon right there. And what about the one on the other side? Oh, the one on the other side.
The other one's a novel.
Yeah. So as I do this story, I'm also thinking about maybe throwing it back a few thousand years and going into the history of the Chinese dragon. Maybe from that point of view, because I put a character in there who doesn't necessarily disagree with the dragons, let's say.
Yeah.
So it could go any which way from here.
That's exciting. I love it. Well, you guys, we are out of time today to talk to the fantasy writers, but don't worry, because RockHill Publishing will be back tomorrow. And James, what are we talking about tomorrow?
Tomorrow we will be doing our wrap up, because it will be the end of the Miami Book Fair. And so all of our writers will come back together We will talk about what kind of good times we had at the Miami Book Fair. We're all gonna make believe like we've been in Miami. So everybody got to get a suntan, except for Haley. She'll
We're
be
all
out.
living through you, Haley. We're living
Yeah.
through you.
Haley's pretending she's not in Miami.
And we'll discuss where we're going from here, because that's one good thing I like about the Miami Book Fair. It's always a good wrap up to the year, but then you also can plan for next year. So we'll be talking about what our plans are going to the future, things
That's
like that.
I love it. So you guys, tomorrow is the last night that you guys have to ask the RockHill Publishing authors any questions that you have. So write them down and join us tomorrow at 6 Central, 7 Eastern, but we'll be back. So we hope you guys have a fantastic Saturday, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.